Good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to this session, very much towards the end of the day. So you must be quite tired, so I appreciate you all making the effort to come to this, what should prove to be a very interesting session, the masterclass on how technological innovation can tackle humanitarian crisis. So we have some very learned, experienced, and eminent speakers here today on our panel. But before I introduce them, I'll just take a minute to introduce myself and the organization I come from. So my name is Seema Khan. I'm head of major gifts at Islamic Relief UK. It's the largest global Islamic humanitarian aid agency and a member of the United Kingdom Disasters Emergency Commission, which is quite a privileged position to be in, as we are the only ethnic charity to be a member of the DEC. You may have heard that the DEC actually made history today. It was announced in the news they're actually supporting the first health crisis, the Ebola crisis in its history. So that's just something, straight out the press. But I'd like to, say that IR did launch their campaign even before that. So I'm pleased we were there on the ball. So Islamic Relief has utilized and benefited from technological advances over our 30-year history, including wind farms in Balochistan in Pakistan, solar-paneled water solutions in Africa, and flood-resistant homes and crops in Bangladesh, part of our disaster risk recovery solution. So we're not just there for when the disasters happen, but we actually try to preempt them and reduce the impact, which makes your giving much more impactful. So technology hasn't just helped in the delivery of programs, but it's becoming more and more important in fundraising as well. So I just attended a session on crowdfunding, which some of you may have attended, which was quite interesting. And, $5.1 billion were raised last year in crowdfunding. So technology is actually impacting charities in all aspects. So that's enough about me. Now I'd like to talk a little about our eminent speakers and introduce them. So firstly, Dr. Sharad Supra. Excuse me, I'll just go back to my notes there. So Dr. Supra is Principal Advisor and Director of UNICEF, Global Innovation Center based in Nairobi, a position he assumed in January 2014. Prior to his latest appointment, Dr. Supra served as UNICEF representative in Uganda from August 2009, a position he assumed after serving as Director of Division of Communication at the UNICEF headquarters in New York from 2004. Dr. Supra also served as UNICEF representative in Afghanistan from November 2002 as a Director of Operation Lifeline Sudan. In February 2002, the Executive Director requested Dr. Supra to coordinate the implementation of Afghanistan Back to School program, which resulted in over 3 million children enrolling in schools in Afghanistan. Dr. Supra began his distinguished career with UNICEF in July 1983 and has also served in Maldives, Bangladesh, and Iran. Dr. Supra is a national of India. After completing his degree in medicine and surgery, he obtained a postgraduate degree in preventative and social medicine from the Georgia University in India. He's married and has 2 children. We also have Sir Iqbal Sakrani. He's the founding Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain in the United Kingdom. Sir Iqbal has been actively involved in voluntary capacity with community and charitable work for many years. He is a fellow of the Institute of Financial Accountants and an associate of the Institute of Administrative Management. He's an entrepreneur, financial consultant, and advisor to a number of international companies. He served as the chairman of Muslim Aid 2008 to 2012, an international relief and development agency operating in more than 70 countries. He is currently the Senior Deputy President of the World Merman Organization. He was the founder Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, a national umbrella and representative body of British Muslims, who remains as a senior advisor to the Council. He's a recipient of a number of national and international awards. He was awarded OBE 99 and was knighted by the Queen in 2005. He's also one of the founding members of the International Advisory Panel of the World Islamic Economic Forum. So to our third speaker, Gisli Olafsson. Gisli is one of the leading experts in the world in the use of technology in disaster response. Gisli is a sought-after speaker, trainer, and advisor on the role of technology can play in enhancing the response to large-scale natural and man-made disasters. He joined NetHope in November 2010 as the Emergency Response Director. He is responsible for coordinating information and communication technology relating to emergency preparedness and emergency response activities of NetHope's 41 NGO member organizations. Prior to joining NetHope, Gisli has over 20 years of experience in the field of disaster management and has participated in field missions in connections with floods in Ghana, cyclones in Nargis, Myanmar, hurricanes, earthquakes, and so on and so on. Gisli has over 25 years of experience in the IT industry, most recently working at Microsoft as a trusted advisor to international organizations and governments in disaster-prone countries. So, Gisli, if I may, could you perhaps start the discussions? I'd like to give each of the speakers 15 minutes each, if that's okay. Sure. Thank you.
Lights are up. What she forgot to say is I have 5 kids, and that's how I learned to deal with disasters. But just before I start, I wanted to just tell you what NetHope is. We were founded 13 years ago to kind of serve at the intersection between the leading NGOs around the world and the technology industry. So we work very closely with all of the big names that you see here on the supporter side and all of the members, including Islamic Relief. And we have various programs. We focus both on the emergencies as well as the development work. But I run that emergency response section, and that's where I get to do what I love to do, which is to blend together the part of technology and what it can do and the difficult things around disasters. So when we talk about technology and what it's doing and innovation and what it's doing to our field, the humanitarian response field, it's good to look back. And, if you start thinking about it throughout history, changes have really happened when we innovated something new and when we created something that we could leverage to disrupt the way we used to do things. And in the humanitarian space, we are certainly at crossroads where there is a disruption ahead. And there are a number of ways in which technology is really affecting us. One is it's becoming extremely data-driven. To know what's going on out there, to be able to make decisions based on data that gets analyzed and gets understood so that we can become more effective in the way we respond. So we're not just sending things where we think they're needed, but actually where they are most needed. And, you know, data used to be kind of simple to get. It would be a one little thing. You would go and ask a few people, do a simple assessment, and then you would make a decision. Today, the sources of data are exploding. We have, you know, mobile network data. We have sensor data. We have all kinds of new sources, social media, SMSs, and so on, that we need to figure out how we can leverage to, again, put our efforts where they're most needed. We're also seeing a radical change in the way we deliver aid. World Food Program estimates that by the end of this year, 60% of their assistance will be given in the form of digital aid. What they mean by that is it will either be electronic money, mobile money, or using some kind of a card, or vouchers, electronic vouchers. So the time of shipping food from across the world in large quantities to deal with a famine are over. We now provide people with funds to go out and pay for the things that actually still exist in their countries. It's now, 25 or 30 years since the big famine in Ethiopia. During that famine, and those of us who are old enough to remember the images that were on television then, were terrible, and you would think they need food. The half of Ethiopia that was having a famine, yes, they needed food. The other half of Ethiopia that was not experiencing a famine had enough food to feed everybody that was having a famine. But the distribution and the sharing between those was not available. If we could enable that instead of shipping tons and tons and endless ships across the world with food and then destroy the market for the other half that had enough food, we would be doing things differently. And that's what's happening right now with a lot of the aid that's happening. There was a great article by one of our members, International Rescue Committee, and their CEO, David Miliband, where they had done an analysis of the use of electronic funds for the Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And it showed that 99% of the funds got directly to those that needed them, and they could then analyze in detail what it was that people needed. And it wasn't exactly the mix that they would have done if they had brought in supplies themselves. So it can be personalized a lot more. I need more food, or I need more shelter, and so on, based on the needs of the individual. We're also seeing a total shift, and I know my good colleague from UNICEF will talk about this, and it's about things becoming community-based. Instead of us, the experts from outside, coming in and saying, you need this, you need that, and performing big, long assessments. By the way, my colleagues do a rapid assessment that is 100 questions. There's something wrong with that assessment. It's definitely not rapid. Instead of doing that, instead of us coming top down and doing an assessment and figuring out what the need is, we can now have the community tell us. Why? Because everybody has now a device or access to a device to start talking about what their needs are. And we'll hear more about that in the UNICEF presentation. But we still have some issues with how we're bringing in all of this new technology and these new innovations. And part of it is that we think the old models of doing things still work, that we can still go and go out and get some grants, for example, to do something. And then we can do a pilot in one country. Let me tell you, there have been so many pilots of every single technology that we are all suffering from what's called pilotitis. We never get off the pilot phase. We're always trying something new, but we never take it to scale. And that's where we need to start thinking differently about our approach to driving innovation in this space. And I firmly believe that in order to do that, we need to start thinking a little bit more like, if I take the example from the last session, like the people next door, the people talking about the money part. We need to think a little bit about how can we create sustainable models for driving this innovation forward. And to do that, we also need to start thinking about new approaches to funding innovation. And it can't be just done through grants. Because a grant only lives that long. When you're done with it, you got to go find another grant or find more money from that person. That is not sustainable. If we, from the start, begin with a model, for example, the models of the startups that we're talking some of them here in the previous session, and we start creating startups that are making impact rather than making money. But at the same time, it's not enough to just make an impact. You have to make a sustainable way of making that impact. And if we put that kind of mindset on and we start creating funding opportunities for those that want to take those great ideas and create them sustainably, then that's something we can do. And we've seen this change. A few years ago, my good friends in a number of the donor agencies came together and created a thing called the Humanitarian Innovation Fund. But it was grant-based. And it's still giving grants, and it's doing nice things. But it's not, most of the projects that they have funded are not necessarily becoming sustainable. So just a couple of months ago, the governments of UK, European Union, US, and others created a venture fund to fund innovation in the development and humanitarian space. And that's the kind of approach that we like to see, but we need more than just one fund that's doing this. We need more, more diverse kind of support coming not just from the governments, because their decisions on what is good and what is good, not good, may not always align with what all of us, the rest of us, need. We also need to be very clear that innovation is not just going to happen in Silicon Valley. Innovation is something that can happen anywhere. Innovation is something that actually needs to happen where the need is the most. Because it's the people who live through the problems that can design the solutions that enable that problem to be addressed. Great example of this is that one of the technologies that has been very much used in the past 3-4 years is a technology called Ushahidi. It came out of Kenya. It came out of a place where people didn't have smartphones, where people had SMS as the key way of communicating. It came out of a place where people were not always connected. It came out of a place where telecommunication actually cost you a significant portion of your livelihood. And therefore you get solutions that work in these environments. So I challenge all of you who come from countries that are disaster prone, think about how you can foster the innovation in your country to create solutions that are appropriate for your market and for your culture and for your technical environment. Finally, I wanted to invite you to actually continue to talk about innovation with us. There is an event happening in May of 2016 in Istanbul, and it's called the World Humanitarian Summit. And it's a big event where private sector, governments, NGOs, and everybody's coming together to talk about how do we do humanitarian response in the decade up ahead. But before that particular event in May 2016, there are ongoing both online and regional discussions where people are brought together to talk about 4 topics. I'm not going to tell you all the topics, but I'm going to tell you that one of them, one of the 4 topics that was selected by a group, involving a lot of UN and NGOs, one of 4 topics that was selected to be part of this summit was innovation and how it can affect humanitarian response. So I invite you to look up the World Humanitarian Summit. There are regional consultations going on. I know there's one for Middle East and Africa I think it's in April next year in Jordan. But there are ones in Asia and Africa and so on. And I know you just came from one in South Africa, fresh off the plane. So, the discussions are ongoing. Become part of them. Help us really lead the way forward in how we can leverage innovation to make response to the most difficult crisis we face more effective and more targeted towards the people themselves, not just targeted against us, the international community, the NGOs. We need the people to have the power. Thank you.
Thank you, Gisli. There was you touched on a number of subjects that are close to my heart, especially the sustainable models. We're often, very focused on sustainable solutions for our beneficiaries, yet sometimes neglect in the third sector being sustainable ourselves. And I think that's a very important point that you've come up with. Thank you for that. I've learned a new phrase there, pilotitis. I should take that with me. Thank you. So if I can then now go on to our next speaker, Sir Iqbal Sakrani, Founding Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. If you could give us 15 minutes of your knowledge. Thank you.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most kind, most merciful. My fellow panelists, delegates, it's indeed an honor and a privilege to be here this afternoon and able to perhaps share with you the experience that I've had in this important field of humanitarian aid. This year's theme of the WIF is the Innovative Partnership for Economic Growth. And we had the leaders giving us a wonderful explanation in terms of what sort of innovative products that can be brought in to improve the lives of our world population. We have other sessions going on, and many of them are perhaps full to capacity because they deal with issues of how we can make money, how we can improve our daily lives. This session is slightly different. This session is to do with how we can save lives. Lives which are important, people in different parts of the world. When we look at the stark statistics, where half the world's lives live on less than $2.50 a day, which comes to about £1.50, which would hardly buy a sandwich for just one meal, let alone surviving for the whole day. So I think the subject matter of how the technological innovation tackle humanitarian crisis hit to the very deep area of how our humanitarian agencies around the world, how our government agencies, public trusts, and private organizations can all work together to save lives, of course, when emergencies and humanitarian crises take place, but also improve the lives of where a large number of people around the world do live under very basic lives, very basic standard of living. I was planning to go through some of the innovative measures that have been introduced by various agencies around the world. As mentioned earlier, I've been involved with a number of humanitarian organizations, and the most prominent, which I've really been privileged to work in a voluntary capacity, is Muslim Aid, an organization that has been in place for more than 30 years in the UK, one of the largest organizations, very much similar to what Islamic Relief does worldwide, working in more than 70 countries, having 15 regional offices, working in partnership with various international organizations, Muslim and non-Muslim, including like AMCO in the United States of America, with the UN agencies, UNHCR, the ECHO agencies, the various institutional funding agencies, with the sole aim of how we can help humanity at large, irrespective of the faith, the culture, the ethnicity of the people who suffer. So it's indeed a great privilege to work with a large number of volunteers in this field who are simply dedicated to save the lives on the ground. We are not short of disasters. And disasters come, sadly, in different ways. We have the natural disasters, which are beyond our control. And sadly, tragically perhaps, they are too infrequent these days. Whether it is the storms and the floods that we see coming up in Central America, or whether we have the constant floods that we see taking place in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, more recently in Kashmir, where they destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, let alone the fatalities that had taken place, or the other serious type of natural disasters like the tsunami, which we witnessed a few years ago, where overnight hundreds of thousands of people disappeared, basically, and the livelihoods were affected permanently. I've had the opportunity to visit many of these areas and see for myself how these great humanitarian organizations around the world work together and help in these difficult situations. Then, of course, we have got the man-made disasters due to the political conflicts that take place in countries, and we have seen the wars, whether it's in Syria or in Iraq or in the other parts of Africa. In West Africa, we had seen in Liberia and others, where again, for no fault of the people on the ground, but for political reasons, there is huge suffering, and these people require some support as well. Then, of course, are the disasters that take place due to sheer neglect of the countries, where we haven't had any natural disasters or any political conflicts or wars, but this is where the poorest country, where they've not developed themselves. And there, of course, the natural resources, deficiency in natural resources, the lack of employment that is there, that of course brings in the issue of poverty. So these aspects, which are dealt in a traditional manner by the agencies around the world, whether we receive the news through the initial broadcast on the radio, on the television, in the old days we used to get telexes and the faxes coming through, times have changed now. And therefore, there is a number of new techniques, innovations that have taken place that assist us in addressing those particular crises. I will mention a few of the key areas that I think are they're already in place and perhaps needs a further development by many of the agencies who are still, of course, struggling due to the way they actually conduct the financial constraints. And we must not forget that the humanitarian agencies working on the ground, and like Muslim Aid, Islamic Relief, Human Appeal, the Fatima Trust, many other organizations that work in UK and other parts of the world rely upon the funding from the communities. It's also the institutional funding that comes in. This is given to us on trust, and we call it as amana. So therefore, those people of us who are in responsibility on the management as trustees have a huge responsibility to ensure that every penny or dollar that is actually spent on the work is spent wisely and carefully. So I don't want to deal with the other extreme area where you can bring in such great technological advancements and the types of equipments and machinery to deal with the areas, because at that time, the cost-benefit ratio needs to be looked in. Are we spending the right amount of money so that the eventual benefit on the ground is there as well? And that's, again, sometimes we see many agencies around the world whose expenditure as a percentage of the income they receive exceeded, and there have been scandals as well, which are beyond 20, 30, 40%. In my view, it's simply scandalous. The average percentage that's been recommended under our faith is around 10, 12.5%, 15%. Because vast majority of the people who work in these agencies are working as volunteers. And of course, you need professional people at different areas to deal with that aspect of work. So quickly, just identifying some of the areas that I think we can work on is, you may have heard of this Cola Life, an initiative developed by the Coca-Cola company. And I'm here not being paid any consultancy fees through them or using as a marketing tool, but it's a wonderful initiative that they brought in where they distribute through the channels key products like the oral rehydration solutions, zinc supplements, water purification tablets in times of crisis. Their distributions were already in storage. When crisis comes in, they are there to try and support them immediately. Of course, the communication and the collaboration is an important area where this innovative communication projects that ranges from Ushandi, Semasource, Frontline SMS, and Crowdflower are some examples which were initiated following the earthquakes that struck Haiti in 2010. A free phone number has been given, and it is set up where the population can simply communicate with the agencies and provide the information so that the support can be provided there. We have got the example of the Maker Fair in Africa. This is an event for craftsmen, the artisans and the scientists, and anyone who else with great ideas to showcase design and products, collaborate and create. And this event was again inspired by Maker Fairs in the United States, which brings together the creative and the resourceful designs. One example of the Maker Fair in Africa 2010 is where a group of designers built a business crafting and the painting cow bones into jewelry and kitchenware, and adapted to offer funding or skill development around these individual products and processes. We have got, of course, the geographical information system, the effective use of GIS, the combined with the remote sensing techniques, which is instrumental and in effective planning and disaster preparedness. The tool can be used in mapping vulnerable communities in disaster-prone areas. And I remember when I visited the parts of Indonesia where the tsunami had occurred, and the island of, and suddenly at the age now, the memory is gone, the famous place. Could you have some names as to where the disaster tsunami took place? Banda Aceh. Key area, and there, to ensure, because there was a real concern that this, again, tragedy would occur again. So therefore, Muslim Aid, with the support of the World Bank, we nearly spent about $10 million in trying to prepare a scheme around the whole of Ireland. And that would give us initial signals that if there's an impending tsunami that is struck, how we would prepare ourselves in terms of the timing, in terms of the preparedness that comes in, and this is where the geographical information system can be most effective. It is also, of course, significantly assists in making coordinated efforts at the international level when it comes to effective and efficient delivery of aid. We have the community-based disaster risk register, and this is where the solution to the problems embedded in making communications resilient by providing them with the CDBR, training, implementation, early warning systems, as I referred to in Indonesia. This was again applied, and it can work quite effectively. Finally, it's also the innovative buildings design, which we need to be aware of, an area to be considered where the investment in the use of earthquake-resistant building designs and use of suitable materials, which will allow the communities to sustain themselves during the low, medium-scale natural disasters. These are some of the areas that we feel need to be brought in, where aid agencies around the world, whose sole aim is to provide that support, and perhaps look proactively that, God forbid, if whenever such natural disasters were to occur, how are we prepared to deal with it? So if I may conclude by saying an extremely relevant subject, which I hope and pray that many of the relief agencies around the world who are competing themselves, and there is absolutely no problem, because as far as the teaching of faith is concerned, you compete for goodness, and that is great. But provided there's no wastage in terms of the monies that are received, there's a huge responsibility with the organizations and the trustees care of it as well. So do develop into the various innovative products, but by all means be careful how it is there. As part of the delegation from UK, we have our booklet, which I hope all of you would have received. If not, please do collect later on. And of course, Muslim Aid, it's an organization which I'm part of it, shows the work that is being done, and we'll be delighted that any more information that you require will be only too pleased to provide. Jazakumullah khairan, many thanks.
Thank you, Sir Iqbal, for sharing your experience of how technology has been used globally, from geographical information systems during the tsunami to earthquake-resistant buildings and so forth, and for reminding us, how really we can only do this work as a result of the invaluable support of the public. Alhamdulillah. So I'd like to introduce our last speaker, after which I'll open it up to the questions, which will be, I'm sure, very interesting and the most exciting part of the session. So there's plenty of time for that. Do think of, what you'd like to ask our panel speakers. After our last speaker, Dr. Sharad Supra, Principal Advisor and Director, Innovation Center, UNICEF. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You people are really courageous and committed to hang around till so late and on a topic which actually doesn't fit in the economic forum kind of thing, because I'll kind of take you all through how things work. So this is the past and the present. This is how things happen in most of the emergencies. So we get the news, sometimes because there are no telephones, nothing, disaster happens, the lines are down. Usually, if the local system doesn't work, usually we get it from Al Jazeera or BBC that hell has broken out. And then we call an emergency meeting, and then we put together a team. Then we send the team to assess. And then the team takes 3 days to file its report, and then we bring together a coordination committee that actually then looks at what needs to go, and then the things are organized, and things take 3 or 4 days to get there. And by the time everything is set up and the system starts working, it's already 15, 20 days gone. And as we all know, that the real impact has to be in the first 100 hours or 150 hours. After that, all those who had to die have already died, and the ones who have survived have already set up systems to survive. And then we come in with things that we think they need and not necessarily what they need or what they know that they need, because really no one is more committed in making sure about their health, their survival, and their livelihood than the people who are affected, right? So it's a patron-client relationship on which the humanitarian model is based on for the last 40, 50 years. I have something that I can give you, and I'll bring that and give it to you. I mean, we had, when the tsunami happened, we had plane loads of mineral water coming from some countries and landing up in Sri Lanka in a place which was totally flooded, and no one was there to actually clear the Western mineral water bottles and then transport them. And by the time you do that, that mineral water was the most expensive water available in that country. Yeah. So, oh, this goes there? All right. So then I talk about the present future. It's happening in some places, but not at the scale that we would like to see. So imagine, people talked about Ushahidi. We have something called U-Report, where people on SMS can actually inform. And in fact, in Uganda, we have 270,000 young people who are continuously in a conversation with us, even without emergencies. And when the emergency happens, within seconds, they actually are able to say, hey, this has happened here, small, big. And then immediately, imagine that they actually start assessing and telling us what's happened and what are the needs at that particular moment, right? And then, so that makes the situation report, that makes the, all right, I'm running ahead of time, and that makes the assessment, etc. The other thing interesting is the cell phone towers are everywhere. And imagine every cell phone tower actually carries a standard load of telephones that are normally connected. So in the morning you have big load, let's say 10,000 cell phones connecting to that tower because people are at home. By afternoon that load changes because people are going to work. In the evening the load comes up again, right? So this is a real example where in a mudslide area, you will see how the aggregate tower data actually tells you that something strange has happened. So in Haiti, using tower load data, one could actually say where the people are moving, from which tower to which tower. So you could actually prepare that. In Uganda, when the Congo refugees come, we can actually, using tower data, say, these people are moving in that direction. That gives you a couple of days of head start to prepare for it. This is the Buruda landslide, and you can clearly see the shifts in the tower load tower data. This is not about trying to track an individual phone. It's just saying, hey, 50,000 cell phones normally work on this tower, and suddenly it's 30,000, and on the other tower, 20,000 have increased. It means people are moving in that direction. We usually end up seeing things like people are living in plastic sheeting. Even the humanitarian workers don't have a place to sleep. They're in tents and everything. But there are things like concrete canvas. You actually put a frame, you put that canvas on top of it, make it wet with water. 8 hours later, you have a permanent building over there. So that when the emergency is finished, you could still actually use that building for some other purpose in the community. Satellites, drones are a bad word, so we call them doves. But basically, you can actually have them flying and telling you immediately what is the extent of damage that is happening in a particular area. People can be reporting video and audio as to what is the situation there, so that instead of sending an assessment team, you send the first batch of supplies, that are required for immediate recovery. And then when the people are ready to go after their coordination meetings, you actually are having the second and third batch of supplies going instead of the first one. Yeah? And then right now, all the registrations are done on paper. You can do it on a computer, on a phone. I mean, and children are separated. So maybe the kids are in this camp and the parents in some other. Now, if you do a registration on paper, as is done in many places, it takes you months to actually reunite the families together. And every day the child is out there, not reunited with the family, the child is at risk of abuse, trafficking, etc. But if you have it electronically, you can very quickly share. And I mean, like in, again, I come back to the example of Uganda, instead of 2 months, within 6 days, 99% of the kids were reunited with their family because of the electronic systems. Imagine satellite companies that are out there. They cover the whole world, right? That's how we get television. That's how we get all of the things, telecommunication. Imagine if those satellite companies immediately provide bandwidth in areas which are remote and affected. Suddenly you have a whole telecom system operating, which can actually cut down the time that's taken between the time the emergency happens and the time the response goes. Okay, the slides are slower. Should do this the next time. Anyway, then there are tools like AccuTrack, DevTrack that keep a track of how the money is moving, where the people are going for accountability purposes. And then online dashboards that people can actually see. Right now, we spend, God knows, endless hours in teleconferences because everyone wants to know what is happening. Now imagine if electronic dashboards are there where all the reports are uploaded. People can actually be looking at that rather than wasting the time of humanitarian workers who are actually there helping people instead of spending their time in teleconferences. So this is how the present future, I say the present future because it's happening in many places, but some of the things are actually like, imagine if you had something like Google Glasses. You could be wearing them and actually transmitting situational reports right from there, variables in technology. So there is a big scope of private sector, technology sector, and humanitarian sector to actually come and work together. And this point, our development model is about 50 years old. It's the patron-client model. I have it, you don't, I will give it to you, and then I'll give to you what I have, regardless of whether that's what you need or not. The intentions are good. It's not that the intentions are bad, but you don't know. So how do you put the affected population in the center? Because they are the ones who are facing the wrath of the environment, and they are the ones who are the only people there when, if I use the word, when shit hits the fan. They are the ones who are actually responding to it, right? By the time we go there, a lot of stuff has already happened. The other thing we have to remember is that emergencies don't happen overnight. Really, other than flash flood, earthquake, war, you can actually see months or years before that it's building. Famine only happens after 3 crops have failed, right? When it starts raining at some place, you know that the flood water is going to come here. There are global patterns established year in, year after. We shouldn't be surprised when these things happen. So how do we then build the community? But the other problem is, a lot of emergencies and the amount of funding they get are based on which country it is and how many cameras are there. Because, you know, the cameras move out. So who's talking about Congo now? No one. Everyone is talking about other things. Not that they are not important, but what happened to the people in Congo? Because when you are trying to bring external assistance as the basis of humanitarian response, it cannot be sustainable. So unless you start investing in people and make sure that the people become able to actually respond to emergencies and you set up systems, you won't have a sustainable humanitarian response. We have preparedness plans, But the preparedness plans are all paper exercises. They don't have running contracts with suppliers. They don't have running contracts with logistics company. So when an emergency happens, we start running and trying to figure out which supplier we have to get the supply from, which logistics company. That takes 3-4 days. Yeah. So essentially, I think there are huge possibilities. And yes, there is a place where people at a certain point would need help, and that help in many cases does not have to be, in some cases would be material, but not in all. Sometimes the best help is the cash, because it's the lowest return on investment, and it gives people the choice to actually find solutions for their own survival. With choice comes dignity, and with dignity comes freedom. Because you could be standing somewhere and people, you could be standing in front of the mosque and people will give you food. But does that bring you dignity? So we need to keep that in mind. I'll stop here, and for a change, I finished 2 minutes, 22 seconds before time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sapra. And you touched on another point that's very close to my heart, and that is disaster preparedness and disaster risk reduction. I think it's, in the charitable world, it's probably more sexy to, when a disaster happens, to show the crying child, the broken limbs, all of this stuff. What perhaps isn't as sexy is to actually prevent that happening in the first place. And speaking to my head of comms when I first joined Islamic Relief, he actually said, where we using our donors' money invest a few pounds in disaster risk reduction and preparedness, it's equivalent to spending hundreds of pounds when a disaster actually happens. So it's much more impactful in terms of charitable impact of our donors' money. So do bear that in mind, and that is really something that distinguishes the more mature aid agencies from perhaps the less. And of course, everyone should be there for when the disasters happen, but isn't it better prevention better than cure? So thank you to our speakers for their insight. I'd like to open it up to the floor now. So if you have any questions, I have a few, but I don't want to hog it. So is there any from the floor to kick it off? This lady over here, please.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Zara. We are into manufacturing ready-to-eat meals for humanitarian disaster for the past 1 year. What I have come across, it's an amazing forum. You've spoken about how technology can help people and how things have worked in the humanitarian sector, how you've amalgamated two things, and there were certain results that you got out of it positive, and where you're trying to get. But basically since I am in this sector for a whole year now, it's not that long, but I do understand, and there's a concern that I think that the preparedness bit that you guys talk about, we are still, I think, tackling the basics in the humanitarian sector, which is food. Basic food, it doesn't get to the right people. Basic things. So amalgamating technologies and all these things are amazing, but we haven't been able to get to the right kind of food to the right people at the right time even. So like for instance, we've just had a disaster in Gaza, and I was approached by certain people to send meals, and I was very disappointed with especially the Islamic charities actually, to be honest, because if I contacted them or they contacted me, they were too much into the into the nitty-gritties of how is it going to be done, would we get the pictures out of it, and all those things, rather than focusing on actually getting the aid to the right people. So I had an opportunity where we had slots of free shipments, and they did not acknowledge. So what I'm trying to understand over here
Can we have your final question, please? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The question is that we haven't even dealt with the basics of things. And preparedness, when it comes to preparedness, we need to focus on how effectively are we getting to the right people.
Okay. So perhaps I could ask Dr. Sapra to, perhaps give his experience in terms of how effective disaster preparedness is, and then perhaps, the other speakers may want to, continue that discussion as well. And I'd like Sir Iqbal maybe to answer the ladies' concerns about Muslim charities, because I don't think we should leave the forum with that perception.
Yeah, in chronic emergencies, we've become pretty effective because the systems are in place. The crisis happens when there is sudden onset emergencies. And one of the things I keep on saying is that if the people are at the center of deciding what they need now, then your investments and your supplies can be more targeted and would actually be used. Very often we think, okay, it's a flood, then maybe it's the food. So in Turkana, there was a drought. People started sending food because that made more sense. And the community said, no, we don't need food. We need a bridge because this river divides us from the other community that actually all the food is there. But we have a standard model of we think, oh, there's a drought, let's send food. So again, the awareness is increasing, but I think we still have to change our mindset where we have to position the community in the center and work according to what they need rather than what our standard package of supply is.
Could I just come in as well? I think Gaza is a slightly a difficult example because of the various restrictions of food and supplies coming in. There was a real difficulty getting in because we were limited against the agencies that were able to implement on the ground. Besides UNRWA, UNRWA, and those UN, there were very few other agencies that were able to deliver. And I know in the UK we had most agencies raising millions of pounds, but difficulty was getting the monies there and the products there. However, many of these UNRWA agencies do keep stockpiles of food in emergency crisis. And I believe they've got various bases in different parts of the world. Come sort of, disaster strike, they are particularly packed in long-term, the lives, the expiry dates and all this and that, and they can be flown in and provided on the ground. However, the logistics issues is also quite important on the ground. And that's where I would agree that now there was a wonderful article in one of the papers in the UK that, look, we knew where the problems were in a big area, but identifying within the areas to where the need is greater, it was difficult. But I think in reference to the geographical imaging and other aspects that is now much more widely known, it will be dealt much more effectively.
Okay, thank you, Sir Iqbal. Gisli, please, if I could have your response.
Yeah, I mean, we see this all the time. There's a resistance towards change in the overall humanitarian community. Why do it differently than we've been doing it in the last few years? I know how to do X, so I'll keep on doing X, even if Y is better. And what we have, we have, every time there's a disaster, we always get approached by a number of technology companies that say, we have this new thing, Y, we would love to, present that and give that to your customers to use. In most cases, what we will tell them is, thank you for coming to us with this new thing, but we don't believe that trying out this new thing in the middle of a disaster will necessarily work. But we want to, be aware of what you're doing, and we want you to come back to us once things slow down, and let's figure out how we can partner with you on doing this new thing Y in the next emergency. What we will, however, discover all the time is even if we come and we say, oh, this is cool. There was a talk this morning about water scarcity, and I don't know if you saw Michael drink the really, really dirty water that he had. I mean, he created a brand new way of cleaning water. But a lot of the response agencies in the beginning were like, no, we know how to distribute, tablets and this and that, and that's how we do it. But over time, he has been able to convince them that this is a lot more sustainable and better way to do it. But it takes time. But it takes also partnerships, and it takes, seeing that common goal and then going out and getting those organizations to come on board. It doesn't happen fast, and if you have to work with some organizations, you have to be extremely patient. But others are quicker at adapting and seeing the opportunities. And, but just like they said, the key is identifying the need on the ground. What do people actually need, not what we think they need? And then there are all the wonderful logistical challenges of getting it there. If it's a political crisis, you get all kinds of fun stuff. We bring in satellite equipment, and in certain countries, it can take us weeks to be able to bring that in. In other countries, like India, you can't bring a satellite phone, period. It's forbidden. And yet you have areas that may need communication. So very often you have political issues, but the more you can do before a disaster strikes, the better.
Thank you for that. And if I may add my own perspective on the lady's question regarding disappointment in response of the Muslim charities that you approached. I think we sometimes forget that charities are no different to other organizations. For example, banks, they do things wrong. Energy companies, they do things wrong. Charities also sometimes do things wrong because they are made up of humans just like other organizations, and humans are imperfect. So what I would suggest, and people might find this quite surprising coming from me as I work for an aid agency, is where you come across something that you're not happy with a charity, do as you would with any other organization. You talk to them and give constructive, and constructive is the key word, you give constructive feedback. So for example, perhaps, and I don't know if that's the case, but perhaps the people you were speaking to, their job may have been primarily focused on marketing, and hence that was their primary objective. I don't know if that's the case. But if they perhaps don't have the right approach, then escalate in a constructive manner. And let me give you an example where this has been very successful. So in the UK, there was a charity, and I'm not going to say which one, well-respected charity amongst a group of charities, which didn't have any female representation in its trusteeship. This was actually highlighted by many of the public. Eventually, it got highlighted in the press, and it made the charity sit up and listen. And I think that's a good thing. Every organization, charity or non-charity, private, public, third sector, none are perfect. But public pressure has a big part to play in terms of evolving, just as it has with the banks. Huge bonuses, some are still there, but I know because my daughter works in one, they're nowhere near like they used to be, right? So the huge bonuses have been cut, huge in the UK. So similarly, public pressure, and this is why I never discourage competition amongst charities. Some people are scared there's all these new Muslim charities coming. Good, stops you resting on your laurels. Good, we should have that. So I totally encourage constructive feedback, because at the end of the day, the cause is greater than the individuals. Okay? Sorry, there was one gentleman first here, and then there's a lady in the second row, the gentleman in the glasses.
Seema, could I encourage more and more questions coming in so we spend more time in listening and then answering you, otherwise time will be going rather short.
Hi, I guess this is a question directed primarily to Mr. Olafsson and Dr. Sapra. I was very, very encouraged to hear about the role of data in humanitarian relief. Questions I have are A, what do you do with all the data that you collate? And B, how do they factor into measuring of impact on society? Thank you.
You want to take multiple questions, or should we answer right away?
Okay, so perhaps we should take the second lady's question as well at the same time.
My question is mainly for Mr. Sapra, actually, and that is that it's all very well that we have great innovation in collecting data at source and filtering it and then meeting the need immediately. But in the United Kingdom, for instance, we have a great, especially Muslim charities, have a great deal of regulatory oversight by the Charity Commission. Now, you know, is UNICEF doing anything to help with innovating a solution where some of their demands, which they place upon the charities, will be met without further burden on the charities? Because even the single point where of due diligence which they require from us, especially since the terrorism and so on, even that single point is really burdensome for the charities themselves. So that's really my question.
So shall we ask Gisli to respond to the first question around data collection? What are we doing? Is this another form of Big Brother?
No.
And then perhaps we'll go on to the second question on UNICEF.
You know, we're collecting a lot more data today than we did a few years back. And in some cases, I believe we're collecting too much data. In some cases, we are being pushed by the donor community to share every indicator anybody can think of. And as a result, we go out and we ask every question you could think of. And create some wonderful analysis out of that that is supposed to be telling us whether we're doing good or not. And I believe we need to focus a lot more on the operational data, on what data do we actually need, not to appease the donors, but to make our operations more effective. But what we see is a lot of that data is being collected, but it's not being shared. It's being kept in silos. You know, we have, for example, the health crisis in West Africa right now. Ministries do not want to share data about the cases and how they're distributed in the country. We have cases of, you know, basic geographical information system data being kept as proprietary by the national GIS agencies. We have, you know, agencies, whether they're NGOs or UN, not willing to share simple data and not pushing to share simple data amongst each other, which would help everybody to make, you know, decisions, better decisions. This is not just because it's a health crisis. This happens in every emergency I go to. We are not sharing data. And yes, there are privacy issues and other things that we need to take into account. And I don't want people to know that there is a refugee named this with, you know, with these many children and these are their names and this is what they get. No. But I want to know how many refugees are coming into a particular refugee camp in a particular country, and that should be open. And it actually is, because UNHCR decided a couple of years ago to make all of their non-privacy related data open. Now that was a courageous decision, and it's a decision I believe all NGOs and all UN agencies should focus on. Open data. That's the key, and that will actually address also part of the other point, the second question that was made. And I would love to see more NGOs, because there are already a few, and there are a few private sector companies that do this as well, who openly and transparently open up their books and show where the money went. And this whole discussion about openness is something that we need to bring in, because if we become more open about what we do, we become more transparent, and we don't need to have all those indicators for the donors, to make sure that we were doing our job, because they can actually see whether we were doing our job or not. And anybody else can see whether we were doing our job or not. And finally, that will create the trust that enables more giving and more funds to be put towards where the need is, because people can see that we're not hiding anything. So for me, I'm a big advocate of open data and in this space, and we started an initiative 2 years ago to push for that. It's slowly happening, but we sure can improve on that one.
Thank you. And perhaps the UNICEF question?
Yeah, I think 60% of the data that is collected is for reporting to someone and not for action. And we are increasingly putting our foot down and saying the data, only that data that is actually subject to change or sensitive to change and is actionable at the level at which it is collected, only that data should be collected. In Uganda, the whole health system data now is based on 6 or 7 questions that are needed on a regular basis, and for any information other than that that doesn't change, you do special surveys once a year or whatever other thing you want to do. Same in emergencies. I mean, don't waste the time of people just collecting data just because you have to file a report. The second thing is about the openness of the data and the transparency and accountability. So what we insist on is 2 or 3 things. One, publish all the information out there so people can see. But at the same time, we are increasingly putting accountability systems which are real-time systems, where basically either through a hotline or through a fixed number, people can send SMS saying this thing is not working or that is not working, and it gets plotted on the map. There are a couple of countries, again I come to Uganda, where the health data is looked at by the President's Monitoring Unit, and they actually publish a report on what action was taken against that data. Education data is being published in public domain on the basis of reports sent by local people or the expected beneficiaries of that. So once these things catch root, that whole investigative approach to data, an inspectorial approach to data, where the starting point is that you are corrupt. Turn it around to the starting point is people are actually good. We just need to make sure that they have the tools to know what they are doing in real time. I mean, you can do an audit, but what it is an historical account of what happened. And for ages, we have been doing audits and feeling so proud of that and saying 5 years back this happened. But that man actually died or moved to another job that you are reporting today. What good does it do to the person now or the line manager now? Why can't we have real-time information coming in that actually creates red flags, that allows the next level to actually intervene and say, so there's a whole shift coming in, and increasingly, at least in Africa, more and more countries are actually moving in that direction.
Thank you.
Just one particular point. As much as I share with my colleague in terms of the concerns and the bureaucratic approach, we should also not forget that of the tens of thousands of agencies around the world, I wish all of them were as transparent and provide the necessary information to both the donor agencies, that are the institutional donors, and the donors on the ground. Because there are, no doubt, some agencies which are corrupt, fraud is taking place immensely, and therefore that line of audit that is required is essential. However, one needs to draw a line so that not too much of time, administrative nature time is spent in just purely providing the data to fit in. Because we get examples where certain of the field agencies, certain fraud is reported, and then we said, we wish that information was provided to us, then that would not have taken place. And it is crucial. So I think there has to be a balance in terms of how much data comes into it, but at the same time, the new systems that are in place, the technology that is in place, hopefully will be able to address these concerns.
Just to give you an example, in 2011, I went to Pakistan after the floods in the fall of 2010. For local NGOs that were doing the implementation, because remember, the international ones just come in and lend their name to the effort. It's actually the local ones who do the job. For every 2 people they had out in the field delivering services, they had 6 people filling out forms and Excel sheets for the donors. You know, that ratio is ridiculous. You know, what really can be used is technology to say, did you actually receive something from that organization? And if the people answer yes, that's your audit. Yes, you need someone to figure out, did they, you know, skim off some money somewhere, but we are not auditing today whether people actually got the service or were happy with the service. And that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
As long as I bring the equipment to the country and I distribute it somewhere and then it sits there and doesn't get used, I can say I distributed it to 10,000 people and filled my checkbox with a donor. But did that help those 10,000 people? That never gets measured.
Thank you, Gisli, for that. I know that there was a question specifically for UNICEF. Dr. Sapra, did you want to answer that?
The
Yeah.
regulatory part of it, which we have to face, if you like, and which I cannot see an innovation for, if you can understand what I'm getting at. It is the regulatory burden that is placed upon us in order to prove that there is no money laundering going on, for instance, and so on.
Yeah. I mean, I can't talk about the specific thing, but in general, what is happening increasingly, and especially UK, DFID and all, we are actually engaged in a very active process of how can you hold agencies accountable without making it an accounting agency. So a whole lot of community-based responses that can be aggregated and all, end-use monitoring tool. In January, we are launching something called end-use monitoring, where actually you will find out from the beneficiary whether they received the supply, what was the quality, etc., and aggregate that. It's free of cost. It would be available to every humanitarian agency, NGO, whosoever wants to use it. So tools like these, we are actually launching one after the other, so that there's a whole lot of trust that can be built right from the beneficiary level, so that you don't have to go through that whole range of exercise to prove that I'm an honest person, because the result is coming straight from the ground, which can be counter-checked.
Also wanted to point you out to, there's a thing called the International Aid Transparency Initiative, IATI. And it's about publishing your numbers in an open, standard manner, so that it can be looked at openly by everybody. So,
any further questions from the audience? There's one at the back there.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm actually the previous session's moderator. You make me like the beast. But I'm going to ask this question from 2 perspectives. I was a volunteer in the early days post-tsunami in Aceh. And I'm also now a media journalist, editor, and talk show anchor. The perspective from me from information way is we deal with the people. So whatever we report will influence how people see a disaster or emergency situation. The thing in Aceh was, people were still sending instant noodles and clothes that they don't need. When, even for me, who is very scrawny, I was pulling 60 bags of rice to load onto the ship. Because my impression before tsunami in Aceh was, the moment if the UN is present, then everything is taken care of. But UN was only in Banda Aceh on the 3rd day and the 4th day and the 7th day. The tsunami hit from below the south of the island. And all these other villages, which had 5,000 houses, no one left standing. No one was helping. So what worked at that time was very low tech. A group of teenagers from 2 universities, I gang up with them. We used GSM 9.6 kilobyte per second kind of transmission. It was slow. But we can relay information back to Banda Aceh, which had the bigger impetus. So we were the forward party. But that was done based on the power of the people. So I think that information should be argued in that sense, because if you empower the people to help themselves...
So do you have a question
for the panel?
The question
is, where in all that has been discussed, that you first empower the people with the information, and then use the media as your partner strategically, because press releases and press conferences just doesn't cut it for the new world that we are facing.
I think that's more of a statement, but perhaps the panel would like to comment. We do only have a couple of minutes left, so if you could be succinct.
I'll try to be very quick. Technology can really help communities to self-organize. And there were some great examples, for example, in the U.S. When Hurricane Sandy hit, of how technology enabled the communities themselves to plan and to respond and to do things. And we need to enable that everywhere around the world. So we can leverage technology, social networks and other things to organize things way faster and way better than the UN or the NGOs can ever respond. But I do want to warn about one thing about media, and that is the CNN effect. In Philippines last year, everybody went to Tacloban. Everybody was there because that's where the media was. If you went a few hours outside of Tacloban, the need was even worse, the destruction was even worse. But nobody came there until a week later because focus of the media was on Tacloban. So we got to also watch out that we don't just focus where the media is, but we listen to everybody that's all over the place and understand better where the need is. But the key is building these communities and enabling them to do that before the disasters happen.
I think Dr. Sapra.
In today's world, everyone who has a phone is a reporter and a publisher. So how do you harness that power and create systems which can aggregate this information and then make it available to people? Visible information is actionable. The key is, how do you empower the community by creating platforms that would allow them? Social media does that, but it doesn't aggregate the information. If you create aggregators that can take that information and say, this is what people are saying, suddenly the realism of the ground will actually come. Otherwise, we'll be running around doing surveys and looking at what these, some network goes to one place, publishes a story, and everyone starts running there to give an interview.
Thank you very much. We have run out of time, and before I say thank you to our speakers, I wanted to thank the audience for their keen participation, but also, just to bring it back, why it's relevant to the WEF, World Islamic Economic Forum. So, Islamic, one of our speakers very rightly said about sustainability. Sustainability, Islam brought tools that are financial tools, economic tools, such as the waqf, which can make charities more sustainable. So it's very relevant. And in terms of relevant to the topic, technology, e-waqf, fashionable now, put e's in front of everything. So this is very relevant. Our speakers have been, great in terms of sharing their experiences, and I would like to thank them, and please show your appreciation.